I'm here to have a chat with Richard, but I'd like to begin with a little text by Benji Liebman at the beginning of this very, very beautiful book. And he starts by saying, Richard John Forbes has been a regular part of the Nirox residency over the past decade, during which his depth as a sculptor has informed and enriched our programs. He has become a friend and a valuable part of our wider community, camping in the veldt, building a sweat lodge on the surrounding koppies, harvesting fallen trees for visionary installations, and inspiring others with his vigor and enthusiasm. His refined instincts, I'm going to debate that. His refined instincts, acute mind, and deft hands have delivered a brilliant body of work that is testimony to a life lived well. So for me, the reason why I really enjoy this text is because the idea of humanity, spirituality, nature, and art making all converging. And in the case for me, with regard to Richard, whom I've known for a number of years and always have very, very engaging conversations with, because of his acute ear, his sensitivity, his gentleness, and his deep thought all converge exactly as Benji has put it here, supremely. But for me, the thing about Richard, I'll ignore the John. Let's go Richard Forbes. Sorry. The thing about Richard Forbes for me is that he is human, all too human, after Nietzsche. It's that humanity is what I find most distinctive. And what I've done in terms of the way I'm approaching this, I've taken out little sections from across the book, which I'm going to throw at him and see if he sinks or swims in relationship to his own thoughts, because I've only extracted primarily his own ideas about what it is that he's making and doing. So the first one, are you ready? Okay. So Richard says, I've been meditating on something other, on corrosion, erosion, the extractive process of carving, and the whole, without the W, H-O-L-E. And when he mentioned that, I immediately thought of Rodin's description of sculpture as being about the whole and the lump, which I thought was a really, really efficient way of summarizing this 3D object. But what I'd like to ask you to consider is what you mean by corrosion, erosion, and the extractive process of carving.
So in that sentence, I say I've been meditating on that, on those ideas. Yeah. The meditation is around what am I akin to water that passes through a stone over time. How do I become as water? How do I carve by removing my thoughts but allowing persistence and continuous repetition to make that hole through the water, to find that space in the stone?
So for me, as I understand it, the elemental is an integral part of making, and nature is inseparable from the brain and the hand, which are the two key components you speak about with regard to making itself.
Or an attempt to be that.
Okay.
So an endeavor to be more that, can I say?
So the interesting that you focus of the emphasis on water as the defining medium or element. And in reading the Sean O'Toole text, I came across this line is that stones in water don't rot. So I thought, do they rot? Where do they rot? Do they rot outside of water? And then I thought about Monet's idea when he was painting the series on the cathedrals. He was talking about, again, stone changes. This whole idea of stone being somehow finite is a massive illusion. So transformation is integral to all of nature, including things that we think of as sort of adamantine and fixed for all eternity. But by linking that to water, you're trying to bring in very much more of a Heraclitean idea, the pre-Socratics. Heraclitus famously said, you can't step into the same river twice. So that idea of change became a vital dimension of pre-Socratic, pre-Platonic thought. After Socrates and Plato, everything goes downhill, unfortunately. But what happens is that you've got this idea of flux as an integral part of making. Even things as substantive as sculptures. You bring in that idea.
Well, I'm recalling my first visit to Paris at the age of 22, expecting to see boulevards full of statues. And then I encountered what the city had done to those statues in order that they would be clean. They had sandblasted marble statues. And so they'd taken away all the fine detail, and I actually thought it was a bit of a waste, because that residual history, the clinker, the soot from a century or two of charcoal use and motor vehicles, was sitting on the surface, and they blasted it off. So we don't really know the timeline of those sculptures, and they would have used high pressure water and sand to do that.
Yes, I've witnessed that happening at the Tuileries, in fact, exactly as you're describing it.
And then what they might do is say, oh, well, we want that all back. So they create a workshop that superficially generates restored objects, but they don't resonate from that time. They're not from that time when they were made.
Right. And from that time when they were made, we've got this completely mistaken idea that Greek statues are white marble. Well, long before the residue of the gunk and the exhaust pipe fumes, there was the fact that these sculptures were painted. In fact, there's an incredibly vivid world of painting that's connected to sculpture, which predates what we iconically think of as the classic statue, which is the white marble figure. But it's interesting that you bring up the statues in France, but one can think across Europe. In the mid-19th century, there was something called statue mania. Basically what happened was statues, like portraiture, was initially something assigned for royalty. And then it became for the powerful statesmen. And then it became for Madame Curie and Chopin and great generals. And suddenly everybody and their auntie was assuming a central space in some court in the city. So the idea of statue mania is very much about the commemoration of the capacities and skills of the exceptional person. That became the thing. So it's very much about sculpture as personification, sculpture as the representation of human beings, as the definitional idea of what a sculpture is. So in Paris, you walk all over the place, that's primarily what you'll see. But of course, that's a very different idea of statues. Yes, statues are volumetric, it's 3D, it's what you're doing, but you're not making these figures, you know. And if you think of, I might be wrong, but I think it was Michelangelo who said, and I'm guessing here, but he basically said that when he looked at marble, he wanted to extract the angel from the marble. So the idea is that built into a block of marble is the human being or the angel, the figure, the figurative can be drawn out of it. It's a very extractive idea of what you do with marble. And it's also weirdly anthropomorphic, because why? It's about just human beings reproducing human beings. You know, I mean, why is this obsession with mirroring oneself as the defining nature of what art is or what it might mean? Now, the thing is, the key difference with Richard's not interested in making those anthropomorphic gestures. He's trying to find another language in and through stone, amongst other mediums. And that's where we're going to be getting to now. And Richard comes up with a very beautiful counterpoint of tame and wild rock. So, which I think is a very, very catchy counterpoint. And this is what he says, and I'd like you afterwards to respond to what you said here. So when I'm carving tame stone, it's very difficult to push the imagination past its geometry. It wants you to tame your thoughts and honor its squareness, to respect its uniformity. In contrast, the wild stone says, you can't contain me, yet I'm only this big, and I'm telling you that I look like a fish, so make me into a fish. The stone quietly screams its demands.
That's a short way of writing about that idea. And it's written in an interview between the editor, Sven, and myself. But principally, it's a personal thing. It's a personal thing because I find that like the artist block. The perfect canvas, spotlessly white on the wall, stumps me. And so the stone in its clean white form also makes me sit and ponder. And I don't like waste. And it's expected me to chop off and lose a whole lot of itself. Whereas the stone that is tumbled down the hill and already starting to say, hey, I might be this, but if you explore, something will come through me. That's much more enticing for me, and really I won't be wasting as much. I won't be treating that material wastefully. And that might be built into me through mum, not throwing anything away. But that is so deep in me not to waste. And the stone, especially when you pick a stone up and you realize, this thing's heavy. And I'm going to carry it from there to there. And I'm going to cut half of it off and dispose of it. Well, that was ridiculous. Shouldn't I have cut half of it off at the beginning of the journey? I have white stones in my studio that I bought from Willem Stradom's Remaining Stones. And he brought those stones whole, big square blocks from Carrara, and then took away a whole lot. There's something very challenging for me there. It's difficult. And so I draw much more out of the stone that isn't tamed than the wild one. The wild one gives me something. It's already telling me nature wants me to honor it, wants me to be part of its shine. Yeah.
Tame and wild rock. Am I understanding correctly that the tame rock is the marble and the wild rock is, for example, the rose quartz? And what makes one wild? What makes the other tame?
It's tamed by our intervention with it. So again, we return to the first point where the way traditionally man took stone out of the earth was to cut it in manageable rectangles, squares, and immediately on doing that, it could be packed somewhere, it could be used to build something, it could fit inside this building, so it was tamed. And the wild is coming out of nature in its shape. These dolomite stones that stand out here are very wild. They even have skins like animals, like wild animals, like elephants or rhinoceros. The rose quartz, there's also an element of when they take that rose quartz out of the ground, they brutally remove it from the ground. It's not done in a kind way.
Why? How?
They go to the top of the hills. The hills look like the backs of dinosaurs with big machines, and they pound at the hill to remove the perfect pink rose quartz. So, and then they draw all that stone together, they spread it out, and they select from that. But you can't actually get rose quartz. There's one picture of one cut, but I assure you it's very difficult to get tamed form out of a piece of rose quartz. And there are other stones that behave that way too. And I really am drawn to honoring that brutalized stone. I'm very drawn to saying, okay, we hurt you. How do we love you?
That's very sensitive. I'm about to tear up. But what I do want to say is, this thing about seeing stuff in stuff.
Sounds a bit soppy, doesn't it?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's the Bollywood gene in me just loves it. Okay. But the point is, you say, here, how do you see stuff inside of stuff? And it says, Stone says, makes me want to be a fish. Now, when you were saying that line, I was thinking about Jackson Lingwani saying something very similar about when he looks at these wooden formations, he sees the figures, and then the figures somehow come out of the shapes that are intrinsic to the wood. But I don't think that's what you're doing.
Now, that's the first obvious statement. That's the first piece of information that says, I want to be a fish.
Okay.
And then when I spend time around that stone, contemplating that and starting to work on it, there's something below it that's, it becomes a form of its own. Sculpture is a living thing in its own right. Once it's done, it's away from me and it's alive out there in the world. So it's my responsibility to not take the first bite or the first corn from the edge of the field, to go on an exploration with this stone and find out what is the relationship between me and the stone. There's something we can create together. And I'm not always certain what that is in the beginning, but it starts to reveal itself. But the first attraction is saying, oh, I could be a fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your work is completely, I wouldn't say the opposite because that's just simplistic, but it's the opposite of objectification or reification. You're not trying to create a thing out there in the world that is representative of something else. You're trying to intuit what a stone's capacity can be without in any way trying to over-determine what that capacity is, because there's a certain kind of unfinished, I don't know if that's the right word, quality to the way in which you relate and negotiate with a given rock.
Yeah, I'm paying homage to its story. When you walk up to that stone, it's important for you to know the journey it took to get here. And I have to leave that piece for you to see. A lot of sculpture is complete, top to bottom, everything. And I think Walter and I are different in that way. His wire is complete, but I need a reminder when I see it, where it came from, like a pang in my chest. Okay, you came from there. I need to honor that story. So that's why I will do just what is enough. And there might also be something related to how I've learned to make art is a single line. I'm thinking of Alga, and a single perfect pencil line says it all. And I'm endeavoring to achieve that perpetually. I want to get there. I don't think I'm there, but I want to get there to that single line.
Do you think that's ever possible?
It's an adventure.
Or even advisable?
We're on the way. We're
on the way, and we're perpetually on the way. This is a remark you've made, which is still, months and months later, still perplexes me the most, I think. You say here, a pivotal term that runs through all my work, whether obvious or subtle, is fear, the awareness of transcendence of fear. Could you try and extrapolate? My work often refers to that within us that we fear and that within us that we have created as a fear that isn't necessarily dangerous.
Yeah, that's very personal, actually. I just put it in another way. And I've learned that the fear, or that which challenges me, or something I want to achieve, that I might talk myself out of, is actually possible. And everything inside me was actually just a voice telling me to be small, not to take on something fearful. And the same goes for if I'm making a sculpture. Nirox is a perfect example of how this happens. The winter sculpture fair will be coming about, and then we'll have a conversation, and I'll dream something much bigger than I really think I can tackle. But by the time we get to showtime, I've achieved it. And so all that fear that I sat in, I transcended it, and I grew. And I realized things about myself that were amazing through making that sculpture. Dark Codex is a very good example. In fact, it happened at the same time as Americana. Dark Codex is in the book. It's a big wasp's nest. It's now sitting at the Norval Foundation, but it stood here proudly for a long time, and it was its first home. That was about shadow and about darkness. And we just came out of Americana, and I sat in my studio, and it took 3 months, but by the time I looked into those cones enough, I didn't know what I could see anymore, because it was just blackness all around me. And then we brought this fear manifestation, and we put it on the land. And it was like a catharsis. Everybody swarmed around it and felt safe there. Like I'd done the work for everybody through that sculpture. So that's the fear I'm talking about. The fear that's really can be illusionary or powerful enough to get things done.
So it's that fear is tied to vulnerability. It's the idea of how you approach making anything. It doesn't come from a position of arrogance or excessive confidence. It comes from a place of discovery and anxiety, of stress, which you imbibe. You bodily internalize, for example, the horror story of Americana, or whatever the condition is, and then basically internalize these conditions, and then exorcise them in and through the making of works.
There was a lot of politics going on at the time. I'm not that engaged,
No,
but the sensation of it was all around us.
Okay.
It was really reading it off that sensation and not off the data of it, the information.
Right. But it is an exceptionally beautiful work. If anybody's in Cape Town, go and see it. But it's an astonishing work. But didn't it also have some kind of a dark codex? Didn't it have some kind of a sonic capacity? Am I misreading that?
I had intended that, and I had an opera singer come and sing into it once. He enjoyed it. But we didn't take it further then.
Okay.
Later works, we explored sound, but that one was really not that so much.
I'd like to, this is a very beautiful expression of yours. You say, at the start of any given day, I turn up the volume on my perception so that I can see forms and shapes. All of these stem from nature, even the man-made shapes. When humans make things, they consider the elements. So this has been a repeated theme in our conversation and throughout your work is the integrality of humankind and the natural world. You know, this seems to be the central central condition upon which your work and your being pivots. Could you tell me what you mean when you say, I turn up the volume in my perception?
I think it's part of learning to be an artist, is slowing down and starting to see and go through deep layers of seeing. It's part of my job to see. When we first are in drawing class, early on, our drawing teacher says to us, look 3 times, draw once. It's something reversed to normal behavior. So that's what I'm speaking about there. I'm speaking about turning that volume up. I wake up in the morning, all the normal day is around me, and as soon as I amplify that sense, and it's my ears, my skin, my eyes, I become a very heightened sensory being. I think we spend a lot of time dulling senses. I do. I mean, if I get in the traffic, I'm dulling stuff. It's so hard out there. But in order to make art that's honest, from my perspective, I need to open that.
Okay. Tristan, oh yeah, just my apologies, but I don't mean to be academic, but it seems to be the kind of description that is coming via Richard is a strong phenomenological approach to making. So it's very haptic, it's about touch, it's about sight. Perception, of course, is a form of touching as well. Perception is a kind of braille. But the key thing is that perception is something that it basically combines all the senses. That seems to be the critical thing here. Hence the focus on phenomenology as the key philosophical tradition that informs the work that's being made. It's interesting here, though, also, I can see forms and shapes, he said, but this is not, for example, the coffee pot as a portrait. You know, that kind of anthropomorphic fixation you find in Kentridge's work, where the head becomes a megaphone, you know, and bombards you. It's a different relationship to things and the manifestation of things in the world through heart, hand, mind. So it's kind of tied to, but I'm also worried about this word, Tristan, biomimicry. Because the assumption here is that bios, you know, orders bios self, you know, the biology of the body, and the imitation, in this case, the imitation of the human body in the world, which for me is toxic and nauseous and incredibly dull, and the result of which is all this god-awful Greek sculptures and all the god-awful sculptures that are strewn all across the squares in Europe. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a different relationship to biology, to being, and to the process of connecting, identifying, and duplicating oneself in the world in a much more sensuous, tactile, subtle, more cryptic way rather than representational way. Is it making sense? That seems to be the way in which you're gunning into the space. I'm just going to conclude with before we get to the boob. Oh, the boob, the pink gelatinous boob. But that'll be the last thing we talk about. Before that, we'll assume a more sober approach to things. You say here that painting is a place in oneself. Sculpture is a wrestle with the elements. Can you explain to me what you mean by that?
So I have a history in both. I started out as a painter and then moved into sculpture. Maybe sculpture is a little safer for me. Painting is this place that is limitless internal space and can unpick places maybe I'm even afraid to go to. And that might be why I avoided it. Because it's limitless in there. And the doors that are open, I might not be able to close. Whereas sculpture has an element of exploration, and then there's always an element of engineering. So I can step out and get a break from that, and then I can go back into the exploration, and then we're going to put the thing on a heavy truck, and we're back in engineering, and then we move it into the land, and then we're back in the dream again. So in terms of the real term abstraction, whenever people say, I'm an abstract sculptor, I don't really relate to that sculpturally. I think abstraction is something inside a painting. For me, it's really lost in the netherworld of color and limitless space. It's a window. and it can go on forever. And I'm still a bit scared of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's a description of you, your body, that I find extremely moving. You say, living in a body, the sculpture takes a piece of me every time. I use up a piece of cartilage or create more arthritis as I lift something heavy. I breathe that many more breaths or moments of exertion, that many pushes and pulls, then I become conscious of it. It's so attuned to your own body and the making process, and also the exacting demands placed upon human strength and capacity in sculpture making. Right?
Mm, very true. Look at Walter's hands.
I can relate, yeah.
So then how do you reconcile the mortality of making things, with the eternality of a thing that has been made, that surpasses you?
Maybe the ego of me wants something to surpass me, something to leave behind after I'm gone. There's some truth in that. But then it's also, I never felt that I had a lot of aptitude for other things. But this I seem to know what to do. And when I ask myself in the morning, how do I serve? Well, this is the gift I can give to the world that might bring something. Yeah. So I reconcile that. I'm going to go away, but there might be something in something I leave behind, an object that speaks to somebody.
While you talk about fear and while you talk about hesitance, the remarkable thing about you, Richard, is that you actually have an immense aptitude for life. This is, for me, what makes your work remarkable, is that actually, because you are so alive and so in the world and so attuned to your own yearnings within it, that the sculptures that are created are embodied, in and through you. But it's not the embodiment of an ego or a self or a personalized narrative. It's actually the point at which the body, the human life, basically fuses, in this case with stone, and the story emerges. It's not the only medium you use. Forgive us talking about stone primarily. But what I want to do generally now is to conclude in the next 2-3 minutes, find out any thoughts that you might have about particular moments in the making of things. For me, obviously, I fell in love with your inflatable, shy,
restrained pink thing.
The shy, restrained pink thing, which is a 7-meter diameter, massive, bulbous, rolling
balloon.
Mm. And there's some pictures of it in various locations around the world. It's inflated, and then it's packed and moves around. Oh, I love this one. I thought this was in the Grand Canyon. It's actually in a mine dump. So there it is, sort of snugly caught in this space. Now, this is not a permanent sculpture. This is a thing that inflates and deflates. It gets distressed, is then repaired, fixed and patched, and then reused. So, and there's a wonderful thing that Richard did, which I think is absolutely amazing, a sculpture that involves him blowing pink bubble gum. So basically, he wanders around in various parts of the world and he just blows this sort of pink thing that pops out of his mouth. So there's that, and then there's actual stone quartz works, which are pink things. And then there's this gelatinous, rubberized thing that gets moved around. But what for me is so delightful about it, and that's the key thing, because we've talked about transcendence and fear, but one thing we must also include is the joyousness of making, the joyousness of creating. And that is integral to the nature of a very fragile, very beautiful, very sensitive human being, but also in the midst of all his human fragility, understands the value of joy above all else. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It really does.
And the shy, restrained pink thing for me is the embodiment of that. It's the perfect counterpoint to the dark codex and to the dark room,
The black room.
the black room, which
Yeah,
is an
black room.
astonishing installation that is currently, I think, at MAPS in Richmond. It's going to be moving to the northern Karoo somewhere where it's going to be permanently installed.
Going to move to Madverville. Watch this space.
So there's a strange archaeological work, like a spaceship has suddenly somehow just sort of landed in the middle of nowhere. And then there's this contemporary or modern art book. The book.
Yes, yes. So it's Arneson. Some of us who went to who had an Arneson, it was the history of modern art, and I painted every page black, and I put it in the middle of the room to read. It's
A strange piece of archaeology.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there's anything else you want to say, I just
Yeah.
want to thank you,
Thank you. Thank you.
for this conversation, and thank everybody for being here.
I do have, before we finish, I do have one last little thing to say. I want to say
Good.
thank you. It's been a really amazing journey. And I was speaking to Walter earlier about this, but I opened the first book from the first box that Tristan sent me, and on one of the pages was a thumbprint from where this book was made by hand. And it made me realize so deeply that at one end, if I open this book anywhere, it's like a brain. It has two sides to it, or lungs. And on one side is all these amazing people, and they all helped make this book happen on this side of the world. And then on the other side are all these invisible people. Each one folding a page, stitching, making sure this looks amazing. I don't know a single name. And it made me realize that all of you amazing humans made my crazy ideas into this. Like it became something. It's profound. It gave me literally goosebumps and tears to see that. I'm just overwhelmed. Truly overwhelming. And then I just thank you for being here. And then I have one last little thing to say to you. I know we're dragging on a little bit, but at the back of the book, you may have had a bowl of guavas in the back. Now, you have to realize that if I'm carving pink stone or I'm carving a guava, my hands they're in praxis. It's all part of the same matrix between my hands and my brain. As you will know, Walter, that's what it is. And so I wanted to put a recipe in the back here. So I've put this recipe in, and, and she's having a giggle. I put the recipe in, and please eat the guavas because they literally were bottled by my hands from the tree that stands in my dear wife's clinic, which is where I got the word praxis from because it's for special needs children and autistic children. And in that clinic is this marvelous magical tree that bears fruit every year. And I can those guavas. I carved those guavas. I made a film about them. And I'll finish just with a read from that. It's called Guava Preserved Memory. Ingredients: fruit, soil, water, sun, time, tree, autumn, fruit, ripe, yellow, skin, hand, pick, press, carve, moist, pink, flesh, cut, pot, water, sugar, clove, cinnamon, anise, simmer, hot, boil, jar, scoop, lid, tight, wrap, towel, rest.